The body was never found. That much, at least, everyone agreed on. What the men said afterward, those few who made it back to port with their voices still intact, was that the ship had gone down fast, faster than any storm deserved, and that in the last moments before the water swallowed everything, someone in the rigging had screamed a name. Not for God. Not for their captain. A different name. A name that sailors across 3 centuries had muttered like a curse and avoided putting to paper, because some words, spoken too clearly, too directly, had a way of drawing attention from the wrong direction. Davy Jones. You hear that name today and it registers as folklore, a colorful nautical
relic, something for a pirate film or children's book, a phrase your grandfather might have used. But strip away the centuries of casual repetition and you find something far older and far stranger underneath. You find a name that once carried genuine terror. Not the theatrical terror of ghost stories told around a fire, but the hard, functional fear of men who lived by reading the ocean for signs of their own death. Sailors were not, as a rule, a superstitious class by nature. They were working men. Engineers of wind and rope. Calculators of tide and weather. They feared what they could measure. And yet the name Davy Jones traveled with them across every ocean, through every era of sail. Across cultures and nationalities, embedded so deeply in maritime consciousness that it survived long after the specific beliefs that created it had faded into silence. That is the first thing worth understanding about Davy Jones. The name outlived the explanation. What sailors feared was not vague. It was specific, ancient, and rooted in something real about the ocean and the men who tried to cross it. The earliest confirmed appearance of the name in written English comes from 1726, a publication by the Welsh writer Tobias Smollett, who used it almost casually, as though his readers would already know what it meant. And they did. By the time Smollett put it to paper, Davy Jones's Locker
was already an established phrase in the vocabulary of British seafarers, meaning the bottom of the ocean, specifically, the place where drowned sailors went, the final destination of everything the sea consumed. Ships, cargo, men, all of it gathered in the locker, which is to say, the chest, the vault, the sealed dark room at the bottom of the world where nothing returned from. But here is what makes that casual 1726 appearance so interesting. Smollett did not define the term. He did not explain it. He wrote as though the name required no introduction, which means the fear was already old by the time it reached the page. The oral tradition behind Davy Jones almost certainly predates his written appearance by at least a generation, probably more. Which raises a question that historians of maritime folklore have wrestled with ever since: where did the name actually come from? The theories are numerous, contradictory, and each one contains something half convincing and half broken. One school of argument traces the Jones to the biblical Jonah, the prophet swallowed by a great fish, a figure of oceanic punishment and divine wrath, whose name was considered catastrophically unlucky aboard ship. To have a Jonah on your vessel was to have a curse in human form. Jonah transformed over centuries of oral transmission into Jones, a mutation of fear into surname. The Davy portion in this theory is thought to derive from the West Indian term duppy, meaning a malevolent spirit, which under the stress of sailor slang and phonetic drift became Davy. A Duppy Jones. A spirit of Jonah. A demon of the drowned. A second theory points toward a real man, a notoriously brutal tavern owner named David Jones, said to have operated somewhere along the English coast in the 16th or 17th century, who allegedly lured sailors into his cellar under the pretense of offering them drink, then robbed and pressed them into service on departing ships against their will. The locker, in this version, was literal, the actual storage room beneath his establishment where men were held before being delivered unconscious onto vessels they never agreed to board. The name then traveled with those men, embedded in the experience of having your autonomy erased, of waking up already at sea, already owned by a ship, already lost. There is a third theory, quieter than the others, which connects the name to Saint David, patron saint of Wales, combined with the Norse figure of Davy, a sea spirit of malevolence, suggesting that somewhere in the layered history of British maritime culture, a Welsh religious figure became fused with older Norse beliefs about what waited beneath the surface of the water. Not a man. Not a tavern keeper. Something older. Something that had been feared under different names long before English sailors gave it the one that stuck. None of these theories fully accounts for how universally and how quickly the name spread. That is the detail that resists easy explanation. By the 18th century, sailors of different nationalities, speaking different languages, sailing under different flags, all understood what Davy Jones meant. The fear did not belong to one port or one culture. It had achieved something rare, a shared geography of dread, a common name for the thing waiting below. What they had not yet calculated was how that fear would eventually be used against them. Not by the ocean. By men. Fear, when it becomes universal enough, stops being a private emotion. It becomes a tool. The men who understood this earliest were not philosophers or kings. They were captains. Specifically, the kind of captains who commanded ships that operated outside the protection of any navy, outside the jurisdiction of any admiralty court, outside the reach of any law that required them to justify what they did to the men beneath them. The golden age of maritime commerce and the golden age of piracy arrived at roughly the same historical moment for the same structural reason. The ocean was immense, communication was slow, and authority had not yet found a way to project itself across open water.
With any reliability. In that gap, the name Davy Jones became something more than folklore. It became institutional. Superstition at sea was never simply a matter of ignorance. Sailors were exposed to conditions that killed them in ways that left no body, no explanation, and no resolution for anyone left behind. A man taken by a storm did not return. A man swept from the rigging at night was simply gone. A ship that vanished between ports offered nothing. No wreckage, no survivors, no account. The ocean erased people with a completeness that land never could, and it did so without apparent cause, without pattern, without the comfort of knowing why. Into that void of explanation, Davy Jones fit with terrible precision. He was the answer to the unanswerable. He was the reason behind the randomness. And a named danger, even a supernatural one, is psychologically easier to survive than a danger with no name at all. Captains who recognized this dynamic used it with deliberate calculation. The rituals that surrounded a ship's crossing of the equator, the elaborate, often brutal hazing ceremonies known as crossing the line, were explicitly framed as tribute paid to the sea's supernatural authority. Neptune was the presiding figure in those ceremonies, but Davy Jones moved beneath them, the darker counterpart, the consequence for those who failed to show proper reverence. New sailors, called polywogs, were subjected to ordeals that served no navigational purpose whatsoever. They existed to install fear, to make the ocean feel like a governed place, with rules and hierarchies and debts that had to be settled. A sailor who believed the sea demanded ritual was a sailor who could be controlled through ritual. The captain became the interpreter of what the sea required. This dynamic extended into daily life aboard ship in ways that were less ceremonial but equally effective. Certain actions were forbidden not because they were physically dangerous but because they were said to invite Davy Jones's attention. Whistling on deck was believed to summon storms. Killing an albatross was understood as catastrophic, a view immortalized in Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a poem whose emotional architecture rests entirely on the assumption that the ocean is a moral system with memory, that it records offenses and collects payment. Saying the word rabbit aboard certain vessels was considered lethal bad luck. Beginning a voyage on a Friday was avoided with a consistency that bordered on religious observance. The list was long, specific, and varied by region and era, but the underlying logic was always the same. The sea was watching, and Davy Jones kept the ledger. What made this system so durable was that it could not be disproven. When sailors observed the taboos and survived, the taboos were validated. When sailors violated them and died, which happened, because men died at sea with devastating frequency regardless of what they said or did not say, the violation was blamed. The superstition was structured to absorb all outcomes. It was, in the language of modern epistemology, unfalsifiable, which meant it could not be argued out of existence by experience. It could only be reinforced by it. The actual mortality rate of early modern seafaring was staggering in ways that are difficult to fully absorb. Naval historians estimate that during the height of the Age of Sail, more sailors died from disease, malnutrition, and accident than from any enemy action. Scurvy alone could reduce a crew to half its strength on a long Pacific crossing. Yellow fever devastated ships in tropical waters. Dysentery moved through crews below decks with mechanical efficiency. Navigational error sent ships onto reefs that had no names on any chart. And all of this death arrived without warning, without clear causation as understood at the time, and without the possibility of proper burial. Men were committed to the sea, lowered over the side, weighted, and gone, with whatever ceremony the circumstances allowed, which was often very little. They went to the locker. They went to him. It is important to sit with that reality for a moment. This was not metaphor. This was the lived experience of hundreds of thousands of men across centuries of maritime history. The ocean genuinely took people and kept them. Davy Jones was not a fantasy layered over comfortable life. He was a narrative architecture built over an abyss that was real. And somewhere in that architecture, somewhere between the captain's calculated use of fear and the genuine terror of men watching their shipmates disappear into black water, the legend began to develop a face. Not a metaphor. Not a phrase. A figure. A presence. Something that waited below with patience and appetite, and that some sailors, in their final moments, claimed to have seen. That was the story the survivors brought back to port. And that was the story that refused, across every century that followed, to stay quiet. The figure that emerged from sailor testimony was not consistent in its details. That inconsistency is itself revealing. Some accounts described Davy Jones as a physical presence on the water, a shape seen moving across the surface during storms, neither swimming nor sinking, simply present in the way that a predator is present at the edge of a clearing. Other accounts placed him below the surface, visible through the water in the moments before a ship went down, a dark form rising toward the hull from impossible depth. Still others described him as appearing on the ship itself, standing at the bow in heavy weather, or glimpsed at the end of a passageway below decks, always facing away.
Always gone by the time anyone looked directly. The one constant across these varied accounts was not his appearance but his timing. Davy Jones was seen before death arrived. He was a harbinger, not a monster in the conventional sense. He did not attack. He announced. This distinction matters enormously. The mythology of Davy Jones was not built on the model of a sea creature that hunted and killed. It was built on something psychologically more sophisticated, the idea of a collector, an administrator of the ocean's dead. A figure who arrived not to cause destruction but to receive it, to take custody of what the sea had already claimed. This framing gave the legend a quality that purely violent supernatural figures lack: inevitability. You could potentially escape a monster. You could not escape a debt collector who operated on cosmic timescales, who had patience measured in fathoms and centuries, who was not pursuing you so much as waiting for the ocean's accounting to be settled. The image of the locker reinforced this. A locker is not a grave. It is storage. It implies that what is placed inside is kept, catalogued, held. The drowned men in Davy Jones's locker were not gone in the way that a man buried on land is gone. They were retained. The ocean did not destroy them, it possessed them. This belief carried a specific horror that cut deeper than simple fear of drowning, because it suggested that death at sea was not an ending. It was a transfer of ownership. Across the 18th century, as British naval power expanded and more men from more backgrounds found themselves aboard ships, the legend accumulated cultural material from multiple directions simultaneously. West African spiritual traditions brought to the Caribbean through the slave trade contained figures that bore structural resemblance to Davy Jones, spirits associated with water, with the dead, with the boundary between the living world and whatever existed beneath it. The Yoruba figure of Olukan, ruler of the deep ocean, was not Davy Jones, but the conceptual territory they occupied. Overlapped in ways that made the legends mutually reinforcing across the cultural mixing that occurred in port cities. Sailors who had served in the Caribbean came back with a richer, darker version of the story than the one they had left with. The Royal Navy, for its part, never officially acknowledged Davy Jones. It did not need to. The informal culture of British seafaring carried the legend without institutional endorsement, and the Navy found superstition broadly useful as a mechanism of psychological order. A crew that feared the ocean's supernatural authority was a crew with a shared orientation toward the forces above them: natural, supernatural, and naval. The hierarchy mapped neatly: God above, the captain below God, the sea as the medium of divine judgment, and Davy Jones as the executor of that judgment on anyone who failed to meet the standards required by all three. What is worth examining carefully is the specific content of the offenses that were set to draw Davy Jones's attention. They were not random. Killing an albatross was forbidden because the albatross was understood as carrying the souls of dead sailors. To kill one was to destroy the vessel of a former shipmate, an act of violence against your own community's dead. Opening a sailor's chest before he was confirmed lost was considered an invitation to share his fate. Certain words were avoided not out of primitive linguistic fear but because naming something was understood as orienting yourself toward it, as creating a relationship with it. To say certain things too loudly on open water was to announce yourself to whatever was listening below. This was not ignorance. It was a coherent moral system built around the realities of collective survival on a vessel where individual behavior genuinely affected everyone aboard. The superstitions encoded social rules. The supernatural consequences were the enforcement mechanism in an environment where conventional legal enforcement was impossible. Davy Jones was, in this reading, less a monster and more a maritime legal concept, the ultimate consequence for those who broke the unwritten laws of the sea. And the unwritten laws of the sea, it should be said, were extensive. They governed how you treated your shipmates in extremity. Whether you threw cargo overboard in a storm to lighten the ship when lives depended on it. Whether you told the truth about a vessel's condition when another ship's captain asked. Whether you abandoned a sinking vessel before every man had a chance at the boats. Maritime culture developed these codes over centuries because the sea was a place where moral failures killed people who had made no moral failure themselves, and where the community had no recourse afterward. The locker waited for those who violated the code. The legend was the law's shadow, which makes what happened in documented cases of maritime disaster all the more disturbing. Because there are records, court records, survivor testimonies, naval inquiries, of men in the final moments of sinking ships invoking that name. Not as a curse. Not as a figure of speech. As an acknowledgement. As though they recognized, in the last seconds, that the debt had come due. What they could not have known was that the legend was about to be tested against something that made every previous maritime disaster look survivable by comparison. The 19th century did not kill Davy Jones. It tried. The arrival of steam power, iron hulls, reliable chronometers, and systematic nautical charting should have dismantled the legend with the clean efficiency of technology replacing mythology. The ocean was being measured. Its depths were being sounded, its currents mapped, its weather patterns catalogued with increasing precision. The Royal Navy established formal hydrographic offices. Lighthouses multiplied along coastlines that had previously been dark. The tools that had made the sea so lethal, ignorance of position, inability to predict weather, reliance on wind, were being systematically retired. By every rational expectation, Davy Jones should have faded with them. He did not. What the 19th century discovered, to the discomfort of its considerable rationalist confidence, was that technological mastery of the ocean's surface did nothing to address what lived in human beings when they confronted the ocean's depth. The sea was not simply a navigation problem. It was a psychological condition. And the fears embedded in maritime culture had not been generated by ignorance alone, they had been generated by genuine exposure to the ocean's capacity for annihilation, which steam engines and iron hulls reduced but never eliminated. Ships still went down. Men still vanished. The locker was still open. The most famous maritime disaster in history arrived in April of 1912, and it arrived with a particular cruelty, the kind that legends are structured to predict. The Titanic was described, in the promotional language of its era, as practically unsinkable. It was the largest moving object ever built by human hands. It carried wireless communication equipment. It was staffed by experienced officers navigating well-understood North Atlantic shipping lanes. Every advance that the 19th century had assembled in the service of making ocean travel safe and rational was present on that ship. And it sank in under 3 hours, taking more than 1,500 people with it into water so cold that survival was measured in minutes. Davy Jones did not sink the Titanic. Ice did. But the disaster reactivated something in the cultural memory of seafaring nations that rationalism had been quietly suppressing for decades, the knowledge that the ocean had not changed. Only the human relationship to it had changed, and that relationship rested on a confidence that the ocean was under no obligation to honor. The survivors described the final hours with a consistency that echoed centuries of maritime testimony. The calm before the reality arrived, the disbelief, the sounds, the darkness, the water. And beneath it all, the oldest understanding of what it meant to be a small structure of wood and metal and flesh on the surface of something inconceivably deep and indifferent. The legend of Davy Jones had always been, at its foundation, a legend about proportion. About the relationship between human scale and oceanic scale. About what it means to exist, briefly and vulnerably, above something that has no awareness of your existence and no interest in your survival. The sailors who created the myth were not projecting malevolence onto the sea. They were projecting personhood onto it, giving it a face, a name, a set of preferences and procedures, because the alternative, which was accepting the sea's complete indifference, was psychologically unbearable for men who had to cross it every working day of their lives. This is the mechanism behind the most durable myths. They do not survive because people fail to think clearly. They survive because they are doing work that clear thinking cannot do. Davy Jones gave the ocean a relationship with its victims. He gave meaning to deaths that had none. He gave surviving sailors a framework within which their continued survival made sense. They had observed the codes, paid the proper respects, avoided the forbidden words, and the collector had passed them by for now. The now was always temporary. Everyone who sailed long enough understood that. But temporary survival is still survival, and a framework that makes it feel earned is more bearable than one that makes it feel random. What is striking, looking at the full arc of the legend from its murky pre-Smollett origins through the age of steam and into the 20th century, is how completely it resisted the degradation that most folklore suffers under the pressure of modernity. Other maritime superstitions faded into quaintness. The specific taboos around albatrosses and Fridays and whistling became historical curiosities, noted by anthropologists and ignored by sailors aboard container ships. But Davy Jones remained, transformed, yes, softened into cultural shorthand, absorbed into the language as a phrase rather than a presence, but present. The name survived. The locker survived. The basic architecture of the fear survived. Even now, the phrase carries a weight that most inherited expressions have lost. To say something has gone to Davy Jones's locker is not merely to say it has been lost. It is to invoke, however faintly, the idea that the ocean keeps what it takes. That there is a below, and that the below is not empty. That the men and ships down there are in some sense still there, held in the dark at pressures that human bodies were not designed to survive, in water where light does not reach and time does not move the way it moves on the surface. The oceans of Earth cover 71% of the planet's surface. Their average depth is more than 2 miles. The deepest point, the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, descends nearly 7 miles below the surface. More of the ocean floor has been left unexplored than the surface of Mars. The sailors who invented Davy Jones did not know any of those numbers. But they knew the feeling the numbers describe. They knew it in their hands on the rope, in their eyes on the horizon, in the sound the hull made at night when the water pressed against it from below. They gave that feeling a name. They kept the name alive for 300 years of recorded history and God knows how many centuries before that. And the name is still here, which means the feeling is still here, which means the ocean has not finished collecting what it is owed. The locker, as far as anyone can confirm, remains open.